scheduled, which I believe is Titus. Titus, yeah. So, okay, right. So I think I'm live here, and let me just start. So welcome to Wednesday night's Bible study at NPA. Tonight we're doing Ruth chapter 3 and 4. We're hoping to close out the book, and I'm just gonna let me just get my notes up, and we'll start. I want to begin by situating us with like the backdrop of chapter 3 and chapter 4. So I'd like to have someone read the last verse in chapter 1 and the last verse in chapter 2 while I'm getting my notes, and then we'll take it from there.
Chapter 1, last one.
Yeah.
So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. Now they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest.
Yeah, and we'll do chapter 2, verse 23 as well.
Okay?
Yeah.
So she stayed close by the young women of Boaz to glean until the end of barley harvest and wheat harvest, and she dwelt with her mother-in-law.
Okay, so a couple of things to notice while we're preparing to get into chapter 3. Ruth and Naomi arrived in Bethlehem, which, by the way, the name Bethlehem means house of bread. I'm not sure if you guys find that ironic. I found it quite ironic that they would have had to leave the house of bread because of a famine. And now because of what the Lord has done to bring back food to the Israelites, they're returning to the house of bread. But yeah, from this section, what we realize is that Naomi and Ruth would have been in Bethlehem for the entire harvest season. So they would have spent just about 7 to 8 weeks in chapter 2. We don't know how fast she went into gleaning, but we think it's close to about 7 weeks. So they were able to spend a lot of time. She was able to spend a lot of time on Boaz's farm, right? So apart from that, what we could see in chapter 2, verse 23 is that the narrator wants us to notice that Ruth spent the time that she was there harvesting still living with her mother-in-law. There was nothing untoward taking place. She was faithful to Naomi from the time she clung to Naomi, leaving Moab, getting into Bethlehem, and then she stayed with Naomi to support Naomi and to work hard. It shows her diligence and stick-to-itiveness and sticking by her mother-in-law. And I'd also add, like, it just kind of it shows you that there's nothing shady going on between Ruth and Boaz, because they're like she's not living on the farm with the women who are there. Let's see. Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering, I didn't know if we talked about it, but so to begin with, Naomi was in Bethlehem and she left Bethlehem, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But Ruth wasn't from Bethlehem.
No. Ruth is a Moabitess, so she would have grown up in Moab, where Elimelech and Naomi settled with the boys.
Bethlehem.
Yeah. It is also interesting that the boys' names are quite daunting. Mahalan and his brother, their names both mean, one means sick and sickly, and the other means dying. So yeah, it's interesting because a lot of like Hebrew names, they speak about like the meaning of the person and the character behind it. And a lot of the text, Hebrew text is also very symbolic. So the names say a lot about them. One was sick and sickly, and the other one was dying. Mahalan was dying, I think. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting.
I'd be mad at my mom and dad for that name.
Yeah, I wouldn't want that name. You were saying?
Is the meaning of the name in the Bible?
No, we could glean that from like translations and like interpretations from the Hebrew language. Yeah, the way they broke down the language. Yeah. Okay, so chapter 2, verse 1 tells us that Boaz is a man of standing and a worthy man, a man of valor, right? We spoke about a man of valor before, that he was wealthy and he had good standing in the community. Um, Ruth wouldn't that note in verse 1 was a note from the narrator to us, to the reader. Ruth would not have known his character. But what she did, what would have happened is over the course of the 7 weeks of working on the farm, she would have gotten to know him very well. And in their first interaction, he certainly presented himself as a worthy and a man of worth and standing. He provided for her in their first instance. He ensured that his workers would take some of the stalks of the barley out of the bundles and throw it down for her to pick it up. And he provided protection for her. He told the guys, listen, don't interrupt with her. Don't interfere with her. Leave her, let her do what she needs to do. Give her water from your reserves, and let her work with the women. So he definitely he showed his standing and his worth, but it would have only heightened in the 7 weeks that they were working together, and he was working on the farm, right? In chapter 2, Naomi also tells her that he's a guardian redeemer, and we'll get into that because I know some of you have questions about what the guardian redeemer is and what he does. And chapter 3 is really where that comes out. Naomi begins playing with this scheme to get Boaz to take up the responsibilities that he has in this place. From chapter 2, we could also see that Boaz would have known a few things about Naomi from Ruth, from before. Those are in verses 6 and 7 and verses 11 and 12. So I was hoping to have maybe two people read it. One person read verse 6 and 7, one person read verse 11 and 12 from chapter 2.
Verses 6 and 7.
Yeah.
And the servant said over the request answer, she is the Moabite girl who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. And she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and has continued from early morning until now, except when she rested a little in the house.
Okay, good. And someone else, or if I don't know if Sola wants to continue verses 11 and 12.
Okay. And Boaz said to her, I have made fully aware of all you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you have left your father and mother and the land of your birth, and have come to a people unknown to you before. The Lord recompense you for what you have done, and in full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge.
Okay, good. All right, so we could see exactly what Boaz knows about Ruth here. He knows that she's hardworking and she's diligent. She works all day on the farm, and in the first instance that he meets her, and she only takes a short rest. She's also willing to put herself in danger. I don't think that like as 21st century readers, we understand how dangerous it was for her at that time to go out gleaning. This is again the time of the judges, and a single younger woman going out in the fields to work by herself would have been in a lot of danger. Yeah. And she's also willing to take a very lowly task. It shows a lot about her character. Now, it's akin to someone who's also experiencing homelessness in today's society, who's like walking around like picking up bottles and stuff, or trying to scrounge up food from wherever they can. In the Israelite, like in that time in the society, the people would have been looking down on those who gleaned, and it wasn't a definitely not a glamorous job, but it was also a very hard like back-breaking job, because the guys would go through the farm, and the guys would pick the brunt of the wheat and the barley, and then the women would come through and they'll pick up basically nearly everything that's left over. And then those who are gleaning will walk by and they'll see a little piece or a couple strands and they'll bend over and they'll take that up and they'll go their way. But it was very, very slow going and it was very, very hard, tedious work. And there would have been a stigma attached to her. So she was even willing to take a very lowly job that would have placed her on fringe in society. And this is also coming from a person who's a Moabitess in Israel. So she would have already been treated down like at the bottom of the barrel here. Some of the commentators who also analyze the book say that there was no reason to believe that most of the Israelites would let people glean in their field. They had already walked away from the will of the Lord and what the Lord wanted them to do, the prescriptions of the Lord, and they were doing whatever is right in their own sight. So in many cases, we could assume that she would have probably wandered into a field and the person would have abused her and run her out to the field, or she could have been hurt because they probably weren't allowing a lot of gleaners, especially from a foreign nation, to come into their place, right? And so here Boaz is able to see that she's a noble woman. She's a hardworking woman. She's a woman who's willing to take on any task, and she's presented with great worth and character. He'll make that statement known in chapter 3 when he talks about how everybody sees her in the community. And it would have been because of her hard work and her diligence and her faithfulness throughout this period. Yeah.
I believe I asked Pastor Jonathan this last week, but since Naomi was a relative of Boaz, sometimes I think like he wouldn't have let her starve, you know what I mean? Because he was a wealthy man. But I don't know, I'm still thinking that Ruth did that just to show herself of some dignity, like not waited to get, like for Boaz to come around and kind of feel bad for them, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because she was with, that's what I'm saying, like Naomi, like Boaz wouldn't have let Naomi starve though, right? Because she was, or how would that work?
Well, he's definitely presented as a man of valor and a man of worth. So I don't think that he would have intentionally let her starve. But with that being said, a lot of like fatherless and widows in Israelite community, they were left outside to starve. And so this is no reflection on Boaz's character, but on the Israelite society as a whole, she could have very well starved. Yeah. And so that's what makes the providence of the Lord in the story so much more stronger, because she goes out to try and just make ends meet and support her mother-in-law. And she just by chance walks across the field that Boaz owns. You know, and that's where you see the Lord leading the story. The Lord is guiding the choices that the people are making.
But
Mm-hmm.
Naomi was not related to Boaz, it was Elimelech.
Elimelech, yeah.
So
yeah.
by rights, you didn't have to do anything.
Yeah, it's interesting because the kinsman redeemer role it's a very legal a legal post, and he's supposed to like uphold for Elimelech. Yeah, he's supposed to oversee. Yeah, but you know, so it's a little bit dicey because Naomi was married to him, right? Elimelech. So
But not black.
yeah, but the primary role, we'll get into the kinsman redeemer roles pretty soon, but the primary role would have been redemption of like people and property, and so we'll see that in chapter 3. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but in chapter 3, that's okay. In chapter 3, the attempt to redeem the property is tied into the Levirate marriage law, and that's how he's able to tie Ruth into the redemption by combining the two roles, you know. But yeah, and they also they weren't like obligated to fulfill the kinsman redeemer role. They could have said, I'm not going to do this, and stepped aside. It would have been countercultural. There would have been a little stigma attached to it. People might have looked at the guy a little bit funny, but he didn't have to do it. Yeah. Michael?
I think we see a lot of like Boaz's heart
Mhm.
in his talking
Yeah.
to Ruth, like when because he notices, hey, I see what you've done for Naomi, right?
Yeah.
And so he might feel responsibility, but like it doesn't really say whether or not he feels responsibility, but certainly he noticed, right?
Mhm.
Like, and noticing is like at least partway there. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
when you have a responsibility or possible responsibility, then you will at least like have an eye on it. Like, man, I should be doing something, right? You know
Mhm.
what I mean? You kind of feel that. And so you kind of keep an eye on things. So we're not saying for sure that he felt responsibility, but the thing before feeling responsibility is he did notice Naomi.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
did notice Ruth. And he saw what Ruth was doing for Naomi and that she was faithful to her. And he appreciated that.
Mhm.
And a lot of times if we have responsibility in an area but there's someone closer, you know, and so
Right.
Ruth was closer, right? And we see that as well. He found it, like there was a kinsman redeemer, there was somebody related who was closer. And Ruth, with her relationship with Naomi, was closer and looked after Naomi from that closer relationship standpoint. And Boaz noticed that and said, hey, well, I don't know if he straight out said, I appreciate that, but he did kind of compliment her for that. It seemed like he really appreciated that help. Hey, I see what you're doing there.
Mhm.
And it's almost like it's Ruth's first responsibility because of their close relationship, because they lived together and because they came back together.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's her first responsibility, and Boaz is almost like the second line of defense and appreciating the work that he doesn't have to do because of the work that Ruth is doing.
Mm.
That's what I see in like almost their first meeting.
Oh, yeah.
I see you
Oh, yeah.
and I see what you're doing here, and I really appreciate that about you, is almost the first thing that he says to her. Right?
Yeah, that's great, because you could tell like when she comes to him and she asks him to be the God and Redeemer, he's like, yes, I will do this for you, but there's someone else. He looked into this. He knew the pecking order, and he knew that he couldn't sidestep the pecking order. There was a process, and he had to work with the process. And also in terms of what Michael said about the faithfulness and stuff, it really showed through, like that interaction they had in chapter 1, where Naomi and Ruth, where Ruth said, I'm not gonna leave you, and I cling to you. Like the words, I'm not sure what you guys have in the translation, but my translation says, and Ruth like clung to Naomi. That word, that in Hebrew, the clung, the clinging to, is a word that we get in our English language. That's the basis for like super glue, for like cement, like really bonding with someone, bonding with something, and it's associated with like a covenant relationship, a relationship that's not easily broken. And so that's what you'll see throughout her character as she's walking with Naomi. She's like really sticking to Naomi, and she's walking with her faithfully. Yeah. Right. So in terms of her characteristics, I know that we spoke in the last Bible study about the Proverbs 31 woman, which is a beautiful picture of a faithful woman, a loving woman, a woman who like oversees her home and her family. And so I want us to just read a couple verses inside Proverbs 31. It's gonna be 1, 2, 3, 4 verses, I think. And it paints an amazing picture of the contrast between Ruth and the Proverbs 31 woman. And we mentioned it, but we didn't go into it. So if someone could read 31, 10, and 11.
An excellent wife and fine, for her worth is far above jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of favor.
All right. If someone could read 23.
Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat under the elders of the land.
And 27.
Oh, 27, sorry.
Yeah, no, 23 and 27, yeah.
And 227?
Yeah, 31, 27.
She looks well to how things go in her household, and the bread of idleness, gossip, discontent, and self-pity, she would not eat.
And verse 31.
Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the great gates.
You guys see any correlation there? It's beautiful, right? That you see the Proverbs 31, who's noble in character, who's far more worthy than rubies. She works hard. She's respected in the gate. We'll see that in chapter 4, when the people bless her after the contract takes place. Boaz talks about her the way that the community sees her, and then it talks about her being praised and how she doesn't eat the bread of idleness. She's hardworking and she goes out and she takes care of her home. So I just wanted to point that out. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful picture that we see, and in the Hebrew text, this follows just after Ruth. Well, just before Ruth. So we're gonna go into chapter 3 now, and just to recap, what we learned was that they worked together for 2 months, just about 2 months. They were able to see each other's characteristics, each other's traits, their good side, and how they're both worthy and hardworking people. They both trust the Lord. They're both faithful. And we'll notice, like in chapter 3, there is celebration taking place. The harvest is in. The harvest is in. I don't know if anybody's wondering like why they're celebrating. I found it interesting. Like I guess on the surface you look at it and you might be thinking, well, maybe the harvest is in, so they're just happy that they have some food. I wanted to mention that the harvest time was a very, very trying time back in those days. When the harvest got close to being prepared to be reaped, neighboring nations would come in and steal their fruits. They'll steal the barley and they'll steal the wheat. And so the guys used to have to work really, really hard to reap all that they had. And then they had to protect the food that they reaped. They'll take it to the threshing floor, they'll thresh it, and separate out the wheat and the barley from the stalks and the chaff. And they'll have to protect it even there. And this is why we also see Boaz sleeping in the threshing floor, because the neighboring nations would come in and steal the wheat and the barley. Yeah. So you'll find Boaz sleeping on the mound of grain, and his men are right around because they're protecting it. And it's a time of celebration, but it's also a time of like, yeah, this thing is about to end. We're coming to the close on this. We're gonna store all this grain. Yeah.
The weather can turn bad during harvest as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you can't get your combo.
Yeah. So it was a lot. There was a lot at stake. And so the revelry would start to like pick up here when they're threshing, and then they'd be really, really happy when they get it in and they secure it.
So stealing has been on forever.
Yeah.
As it was in the beginning.
As it was in the beginning.
Wow.
Yeah. Another thing to remember is also the harvest is done. So Ruth is not able to glean anymore. This is why Naomi seems to like get like antsy. She's about to spring into action, because their food supply now is gonna get cut short, and she's gonna have to figure out something else to glean or do.
You know what's amazing about that though? It's like right at the beginning of the Bible, God told Adam that there's gonna be grief, toiling the soil, and it's like they knew there'd be trouble for everything they worked for.
Oh yeah.
And it carries on just like this, like they don't have ease for their food, like you told Adam, nothing's coming easy now.
Nothing by the sweat of your brow, you shall eat bread. Literally, you gotta work hard now.
Sleeping there to keep protected.
Yeah, yeah.
It's amazing how that just goes through,
Mm, mm.
and we do now.
And all the way to today, yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's a trap. It's like, honestly, it's a trap. You have to work hard and you have to be faithful, and it's a prescription by the Lord. But like in today's society, you're working to work. Like you're working to just barely make ends meet. Most people are. And it's a big distraction from like seeking the Lord faithfully. A lot of people are putting work and everything else ahead of coming to the church. And that's a side note that I could go down on a rabbit trail with, talking about like Sabbath and the fact that taking a Sabbath is really a faithful statement in setting aside your work and trusting the Lord for providing all that you need. Yeah. But yeah, it's a rabbit trail. Yeah. So we're gonna see Naomi start to launch her plan in chapter 3. Would someone read chapter 3 verses 1 to 4?
One day, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you would be cared for?" Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been kinsman of ours, tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor. But don't let him know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his seat and lie down. And he will tell you what to do. Up to there?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Okay, so a couple things to note. We saw in chapter 2, verse 23, it says she lived with her mother-in-law, right? And then we see it again in chapter 1. My daughter, I must find, like one day Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you." The Hebrew word from mother-in-law, which is it's very interesting. It's kamoth or kamot. And it comes from the essence of the word. It comes from what we'd consider to protect, like a protector, to defend or to like shelter or to give refuge to someone. And so what the author is saying, like between these two verses, is that Naomi is now going to take up a role. She's going to start looking to find a way to protect and to shelter Ruth after all her faithfulness and all that she's done for her. She's gonna stand by this role of a mother-in-law and really come alongside her and find a place for rest that she could secure her in. And so she's taking up this defensive role, and she's concerned with giving security to Ruth and rest to her. This section sounds a little bit like sketchy, doesn't it? Like I don't know if you guys like found. I read it and I looked at it and I'm like, this looks a little bit sketchy. I mean, I know it's a love story and it's a good story and you're trying to figure out what's taking place, right? I think we need to read it through like historic eyes, in the cultural context that it was written for. It was written for the Hebrew people, the Israelites. It was written at a time where we don't understand what's taking place, like between the people. We don't understand how they interact with each other. And so like we could read our perception from what we see around us in media and in our culture. And we might think about it as something being a little bit weird and sketchy. Yeah.
Well, that sketchiness,
Mhm.
I always thought of was with Jacob when he was with Rachel,
Mm.
and then he woke up in the morning and it wasn't Rachel.
Oh yeah, that's
And
deception.
but I just think of how this works in the marriage part, because he goes, "Well, what are you doing here?" And then her dad said, "Well, the oldest one has to go first." So
Yeah.
it's kind of like how the contact's even made, you know, like how is she supposed to go not to his head, but to his feet and then cover his feet, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of, makes me think, like, what was Joseph thinking when he was with her at night, not knowing it was Rachel?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I just get confused by that, so.
It is. Yeah, it's confusing. One thing to remember is like when we're reading historic literature, especially like Hebrew literature, it's supposed to be meditative. Like we read it and we absorb it and we meditate on it and we puzzle with it, just like Ray is doing. And we ask, what's the connection and what does it have for me to learn? And so we'll dig into a little bit of the cultural context as we go in. I'm gonna just like step into like verse 3 first. She tells her to wash and to perfume herself and change her clothes. This is like a cultural thing in terms of most of the commentators agree that she would have been wearing like clothes of mourning and presenting herself in a particular way where she's not open to proceeding with life and looking for a suitor and that type of stuff. When we dig into later on, you'll see Boaz says, blessed be you because you haven't chased after like a younger man. Because she's now making this change in stance, this change in statement and presentation. So, and the first person she chooses is Boaz, right? But yeah, she's on the advice of Naomi. She's gonna step into this new phase, and she's gonna go out there and see if she could get a Kingsman Redeemer, to come alongside her and to help them out. The entire plan is a little bit problematic, like it's dangerous, right? If she wasn't safe in the field, like gleaning, she definitely wouldn't be safe on the threshing floor. The threshing floor is a place where the guys would go to separate the barley and wheat, right? But it was also like in many cities, kind of like a marketplace. People would come and sell stuff, and there would be like revelry around there, and there'll be a lot of things taking place at the threshing floor. If we look at Hosea chapter 9, verse 1, I'll read it real quick, and before we go on, it says, "Do not rejoice, Israel. Do not be jubilant like the other nations, for you have been unfaithful to your God. You love the wages of a prostitute at every threshing floor." So this is the kind of stuff that used to take place in the threshing floor. There used to be market stuff going on. People used to be selling stuff, trading stuff. There was a lot of guys that used to work hard and they would be drinking. And there were a lot of prostitutes that used to circle and roam the threshing floor. So she's sending Naomi's sending Ruth in a very precarious and very dangerous situation. It's a situation that could have jeopardized her character and her standing in the community even further, and it could have jeopardized Boaz's standing, which is why his reaction to her and his blessing her means so much more, because he looked at her and he took care of her and he was gentle with her and he didn't abuse her and he didn't let her be ashamed, and so it speaks so much about Boaz as that type of Christ and how he takes care of us, even in our place of despair. Mm-hmm.
So now I've got a question about the threshing floor. So when the angel came to Gideon, would Gideon have been with other people maybe then?
I'm not sure. I could try and research it, but
No, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is
yeah,
it-
there may have been other people around. You have to understand, like a lot of the instances where angels show up in the Bible, like many people don't know they're angels. They look like regular human beings, right?
Yeah.
Like even when Joshua goes out to meet the angel of the Lord, he approaches him and asks him, "Whose side are you on?" He looks like a man, right?
Well, Gideon was hiding, so there could have been other people hiding with him too then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, but.
No. Ask your question. No,
I just
that's
thought
good.
of That threshing floor, it looks like a party place now.
Yeah. A little bit of a party place.
Well,
But yeah,
prostitutes-
so that's why she says, don't let yourself be seen.
Yeah, well, no,
Like
that's
disguise
not-
yourself. Yeah, protect yourself, and wait for the most opportune time when the man is happy and fed and in good
Well,
spirits.
Haman was eating and drinking.
Yeah. So he wasn't drunk, but he was in good spirits, right? And so I guess that's good practical advice from the older lady. Don't approach the guy when he's angry. Approach him. Approach him when when his tummy's full. So, oh yeah. Okay, so we know that. So we know what's taking place here. She sends her out. She's gonna go try to get Boaz to take her up as a God and Redeemer. She has to be very careful. It's a very dangerous, problematic situation she's getting in. And so now, can we read verses 5 to 9?
Chapter 3.
Yeah, chapter 3, 5 to 9.
He said to her, "All that you say I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law had commanded her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came secretly and uncovered his feet and lay down. It happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled and bent forward, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative."
Yeah, that's good. That's perfect. Okay. All right, so yeah, we just went from one level of sketchy. Now she broke into the man's bedroom, right? Crawled into his bedroom, got by his feet, and uncovered his feet and laid down. So I don't know. It sounds funny. But this is what I was talking about. Oh yeah, wanna go first?
It's just what's even funnier
Yeah.
is that she woke him up and she said, "Cover me."
Yeah.
It's like, give me your blanket.
Yeah, I uncovered your feet. Now give me your blanket. No. This is where the 21st century eyes it fails us, right? Because we don't know what's taking place. What's happening is that it's a cultural gesture on the part of Ruth. This is not like a proposition. What it is it's a show of humility and servitude. Think about the woman at Jesus' feet, anointing his feet with oil and rubbing his feet with her hair. Think about coming before a king and bowing down and placing your face to the ground before him. What she's doing in the situation is that she's presenting herself as a servant, as a humble servant, and saying to him, "Listen, you are my Lord, and I seek covering from you. I seek to be clothed with your protection and your provision and your spiritual covering as well, because he's a spiritual man. Every 2 words that comes out his mouth is the Lord bless you, or the Lord be with you, or the Lord, And so she wants that. She wants that covering within the family and within spiritually and everything else. And so we have to remember that when we read it. Even in this interaction between 5 to 9, he calls her my daughter twice. Do you realize that? In verse 10 and verse 11, he says, "Lord bless you, my daughter. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid." So he's still seeing her as something to be valued and protected, and he's seeing her as a daughter. And she comes before him as a servant. What does she say in verse 9? "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth." Now this is in direct contrast to the terms that would have been used before. In chapter 2, she's referred to as a worker. So she's presenting herself specifically as a servant.
You know what's neat about that too? It's like Jesus with the lady with the blood issue. He said, "My daughter."
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like caring for someone, how
Yeah.
we use that. Like, and then Boaz says that with her, like, you
Yeah.
know, like with authority. And Jesus did that with the woman with the blood issue too.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And yeah, no, that's okay.
Just, I still have a question about the setting that we're in, the threshing floor.
Yeah.
So is that, you were mentioning it was kind of a public place?
Yeah, it was on a hill.
So would there have been like one per town kind of a thing?
Yeah.
Would they have shared the threshing floor, or would he have owned it? Is that like his estate threshing floor and like only he uses it, he and his people? Or is it like the local town has one threshing floor?
Yeah, more likely than not, it would have been a communal threshing floor. He's a wealthy man. He has a lot of fields, but the threshing floor needed to be on a hill. It needed to be made of like, the ground was like, yeah, the ground was hard stone or like hard mud patted down. And because you need it on a hill, because when you throw the grain up in the air, the wind is what separates the grain, right? The lighter stuff is blown further away from the pile. And so you get this natural, like 3 natural heaps being formed as they throw the grain in the air. And it separates the barley and the wheat and the chaff and the stalks. The chaff goes the furthest. That's like what we read about in the wicked people in Psalm 1. You know, they're like a chaff which a wind driveth away. And so yeah, it would have most likely been a communal place, and it would have most likely had people lining up. So Boaz's like neighbor could have very well been like a couple 100 feet away with his wagons, just waiting until tomorrow for his turn on the threshing floor to go separate his harvest. Mm. Yeah. So I back to this humility and a servitude picture. I find it beautiful because it's a picture of us coming before Jesus' feet, right? It's nothing like, you know, it's all humility and servitude. Nothing, that will give you a picture of something, untoward taking place. Yeah, Abby.
It must have been humiliating for her because she's a woman, It just shows like the man is in charge.
Yeah. Well, the culture is a male-dominated culture. The culture is a culture that, like, I mean, he's a guardian redeemer and he didn't have to redeem her. Like, that's to tell you, like, a lot of like widows and fatherless girls would have gone like starved because they didn't have the right man to stand up for them in the community. And so this is what makes Boaz exceptional. And this is one of the reasons why we see him as a type of Christ, because he redeems her. And he does it because of like a pure, genuine love, right?
I wonder if it's still practiced to this day.
This particular guardian redeemer, maybe, like, honestly, like I wouldn't be surprised if they still do. There are some cultures that definitely it's patriarchal, that the men make the decisions for the women, and it's almost like they don't have a say.
Well, there's
Still,
prearranged marriages still with a lot of cultures.
yeah, and I mean, I'll be honest with you, that could go either way. That could be a good thing or a bad thing.
No, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
like, cultures are a lot different than our Western.
Oh yeah,
cultures.
and then we don't understand what's taking place.
There's still a lot of countries where the women are absolutely not.
Yeah. No, don't say that too loud. Don't say that too loud.
They're gonna
Okay.
get thrown out of here. I won't tell you, Abby, sorry.
Right. Okay, so yeah. So she says throw the corner of your garment over me. And again, it's metaphoric, it's symbolic. It's not, as Ray said, she woke this guy up and now she's taking his blanket. So, but it is metaphorical because it's a way of saying, I want you to cover me and protect me. I want you to, redeem me.
Psalm
And
91.
yeah,
Under the wings of God.
under the wings of God. Yeah. So,
Sorry, just to add into that, is it because when she said and declared that you are the guardian and redeemer,
mm.
he did not knew, like he didn't know beforehand until she actually said it, then probably, oh wow, you are.
No, he would have known. He would have known. He knew from before. And it, like, it's apparent because in that particular interaction, the second thing he says, apart from I will do it for you, my daughter, is but there's another one before me. Like, Boaz did his research. He knows. Like, he's probably looking at Ruth on the farm for like 7 weeks, and he's like, I can marry this lady, but it's not my number. My number is not up. So yeah, but he knows. He knows.
She did too.
Yeah.
We've probably seen his eyes look at her.
Mm.
Maybe that's right.
Yeah.
No, but when the guy starts staring at you all the time, you start to wonder, like, this guy's got something on me.
I think Naomi knew more than Ruth knew. Like,
Mm.
Ruth doesn't seem to be the one who knows, right?
Well, Ruth.
Naomi is the one who's like, hey,
She knows the
Boaz.
truth.
Yeah. Well, Ruth is definitely driven by this
Well,
this
Naomi
need
knows
to give her protection, right? Yeah.
Naomi knows the rules of how it works.
Yeah, because she's a Moabitess, and so Naomi's from the culture, and Naomi's gonna guide her a little bit. But even Ruth goes off on her own. Naomi says, Boaz will tell you what to do, and then Ruth is like, listen, you're a God and Redeemer, give me covering, help me out here, and so yeah,
Well,
so yeah.
They wouldn't have had redeemers, right?
No, they would not.
No.
And like, this is what also makes it like dangerous, because she's a woman of foreign nationality, coming before a man